The throne room stretched into darkness like the throat of some ancient beast, its vaulted ceilings lost in shadow and starlight. Commander Eli Vance had crossed 1,000 parsecs to reach this place, traversed the cold nebulous killing fields, survived the gravity wells of the morning stars, and negotiated passage through territories where human ships were nothing more than prey. All to stand here, in the heart of the Nocturnus Empire, before a queen who ruled 10,000 worlds yet could not see her own reflection without turning away. The air tasted of copper and ozone, thick with the scent of old stone and something else, something that reminded him of battlefields after the smoke cleared, when the only sounds were the wind through broken armor and the quiet settling of ash. Mist coiled around his boots, luminous and alive, as though the very atmosphere of this place possessed consciousness. Overhead, through windows of stained glass that had survived wars older than Earth's recorded history, the violet and crimson light of the Sanguis Nebula poured in like divine judgment, painting everything in shades of blood and twilight. He had expected guards, weaponry, the cold efficiency of an empire built on conquest and fear. Instead, there was only silence, broken occasionally by the whisper of something moving in the shadows, not threatening but watchful, as though the castle itself breathed and observed with 1,000 unseen eyes. The architecture defied human understanding. Gothic spires melded seamlessly with bioluminescent technology, where ancient gargoyles housed targeting systems, and flying buttresses doubled as energy conduits that hummed with barely contained power. It was beautiful in the way a supernova was beautiful. Terrible, magnificent, and utterly beyond the scale of mortal comprehension. And there, at the far end of the throne room, seated upon a chair carved from a single piece of midnight crystal that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it, was Queen Thessaly IX, sovereign of the Blood Courts, Empress of the Nocturnus Dominion, and, according to every intelligence brief, every whispered rumor in spaceport bars, every terrified transmission from doomed vessels, the most dangerous being in the known galaxy. She was not what he expected. Eli had seen the propaganda broadcasts, the intimidation reels transmitted to rebellious systems before the fleets arrived. In those recordings, Queen Thessaly appeared as something from humanity's darkest nightmares, a towering figure of pure predation, her features hidden in shadow, her voice a thing that bypassed the ears entirely and spoke directly to the primal terror centers of the brain. Colonies surrendered rather than face her wrath. Admirals fell on their own swords rather than be taken to her court. Her name was a curse word in 15 languages and a prayer for quick death in 30 more. But the woman, if woman was the right word, who sat before him now seemed smaller somehow, despite her regal bearing and the obvious power that radiated from her like heat from a star. She wore robes of deep crimson and black that flowed around her like living shadow, cut in a style that was both ancient and impossibly advanced, with patterns that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally, geometric designs that hurt the eye if stared at too long. Her figure was striking, curves that would have made her remarkable by any species standards, a physique that somehow balanced predatory grace with an almost painful vulnerability. But it was her face that held him transfixed. Pale as starlight filtered through ice, her skin possessed a luminescence that seemed to come from within, not quite glowing but impossibly radiant, as though she were carved from moonlight given solid form. High cheekbones, full lips that would have been perfectly beautiful if not for the delicate fangs that pressed against them, and eyes, God, her eyes, that burned with a crimson light so intense they left afterimages when he blinked. Yet despite their inhuman color, despite the predatory slit of her pupils, there was something in those eyes that he recognized instantly, something that transcended species and empire and the vast gulf between their worlds. Bang. Long silver hair cascaded around her shoulders and down her back, moving with a life of its own despite the still air, each strand catching the nebula light and refracting it into impossible colors, violet bleeding into silver, crimson dissolving into pearl, a supernatural wind that existed only for her playing through those metallic tresses. Across her cheekbones and temples, delicate markings traced patterns in her skin, bioluminescent script in a language older than human civilization, pulsing gently with her heartbeat, if she had a heartbeat at all. They were beautiful, these markings, like living tattoos that told stories in a tongue he couldn't comprehend. And behind her, partially folded against her back like a cloak, were wings. Not the leathery bat wings of Earth's mythology, though they bore some resemblance. These were elegant, almost translucent membranes stretched between bone structures that seemed too delicate to support flight, yet he had seen the footage of her kind in aerial combat, moving through the void of space with a grace that made starfighters look clumsy. The wings caught the light and transformed it, creating a halo effect that should have made her appear angelic. Instead, it only emphasized the contradiction she embodied: beautiful and terrible, elegant and monstrous, seductive and horrifying in equal measure. She had not acknowledged his presence yet. Her gaze was fixed on something in the middle distance, her expression a carefully maintained mask of regal indifference. But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the armrests of her throne with just slightly too much force, the minute tremor that ran through her when the nebula light shifted and momentarily illuminated more of her features. This was not the confident tyrant he had prepared himself to face. This was a queen who sat alone in a throne room built for thousands, surrounded by shadows that felt less like security and more like hiding places. Commander Eli Vance had come here to negotiate the release of mining colonies in the Outer Verge, to plead for the lives of 3 million human souls who had inadvertently settled in what turned out to be Nocturnus territory. He had come prepared to offer technological exchanges, trade agreements, even a formal declaration of Earth's submission to the blood courts if that's what it took. He had come ready to face a monster. He had not come prepared to feel his heart break at the sight of her. The silence stretched between them, vast and heavy as a collapsing star. Somewhere in the darkness above, something chimed, not quite musical but resonant, as though the castle itself were marking the passage of time in increments humans were not meant to perceive. The mist at his feet grew thicker, rising to his knees, and he became aware of eyes watching from the shadows, not hostile but intensely curious, as though his presence here was an event of cosmic significance. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Queen Thessaly's gaze shifted. Those crimson eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch, and for a moment, he understood why entire armadas turned and fled at the sight of her. There was power in that gaze, ancient and terrible, the accumulated weight of millennia compressed into a single look. She could have killed him with a thought, crumbled his bones to dust with a gesture, snuffed out his consciousness like a candle flame in a hurricane. Instead, she looked away. It was such a small gesture, such a profoundly human motion, the slight turn of her head, the subtle lowering of her gaze. But in that moment Eli understood something that no intelligence report, no military briefing, no diplomatic analysis had prepared him for. Queen Thessaly IX, sovereign of the blood courts, ruler of 10,000 worlds and commander of fleets that could shatter moons, was not looking away out of disinterest or dismissal. She was looking away because she was ashamed. "You should not have come here, Commander Vance." Her voice was like silk drawn across broken glass, beautiful and dangerous, with harmonics that suggested multiple tones speaking in perfect unison. It resonated in his chest, bypassed his ears, and spoke directly to something deeper. "The Outer Verge colonies will be spared. I have already issued the decree. You have wasted a journey. You should have been relieved. Should have been ecstatic. 3 million lives saved with a single sentence, the mission accomplished before he'd even spoken a word." But something in her tone, in the way she deliberately kept her face turned away, stopped him from accepting the victory and leaving. The mist swirled thicker now, responding to the Queen's emotional state like a living thing attuned to her heartbeat. Eli could feel the temperature dropping, could see his breath misting in the air before him. This wasn't just a throne room, he realized. It was a chamber designed to respond to its occupant, to shift and change with her moods, to become an extension of her very being. Right now, as despair flickered across her perfect, terrible features, the room was becoming a manifestation of loneliness. "Your people have stories," Queen Thessaly continued, her voice carrying an odd, distant quality, as though she were speaking to him from across a vast gulf of time and space. "I have studied your mythology extensively. It is instructive. You have tales of beauty and the beast, of cursed princes and monstrous forms that hide noble hearts. You tell yourselves that true love can see past the surface, can recognize worth beneath ugliness." She paused, and when she continued, there was something raw and bleeding in her tone. But you have no stories, not really, about creatures who are told they are beautiful and know it for a lie. About monsters whose horror lies not in deformity but in the perverse artistry of their design. She finally turned to face him fully, and the nebula light streaming through the shattered windows caught her features in brutal clarity. Eli felt his breath stop, not from fear but from the sheer overwhelming impact of her presence. Every detail of her face was a study in contrasts. The elegant curve of her jaw undermined by the predatory sharpness of her fangs, the soft fullness of her lips made dangerous by the faint trace of bioluminescence that suggested venom, the delicate bone structure of her cheekbones marked by those alien patterns that pulsed with otherworldly light. "Do you know what it is like, Commander Vance?" she asked, rising from her throne with a fluid grace that made his heart stutter. "To be called beautiful by voices that shake with terror? To have admirals compose poetry about your perfection while their hands tremble on their sidearms? To be desired and feared in the same breath, to watch lust and revulsion war in the same eyes." She descended the steps of her dais slowly, her robes flowing around her like liquid shadow, her wings rustling softly with each movement. She was tall, taller than him by several inches, and her presence filled the space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. Power radiated from her, ancient and terrible, but beneath it, he could sense the rawness of a wound that had never healed. "For 3,000 years, she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the number, revealing age beyond human comprehension, "I have ruled these territories. I have conquered worlds, united the blood courts, brought order to chaos and law to anarchy. I have been called Empress, Sovereign, the Crimson Death, the Blood Angel, the Queen of Nightmares. I have been worshipped as a god by species who built temples in my image. I have been cursed as a demon by those who pray for my destruction." She stopped, still maintaining distance, but close enough now that he could see the minute details of her face, the way her pupils contracted and dilated with her emotional state, the almost imperceptible iridescence of her skin, the subtle play of muscles beneath that perfect surface that suggested strength capable of tearing through battle armor. "But do you know what I have never been in 3,000 years of existence?" She asked the question softly, and there was such profound loneliness in it that Eli felt something crack open in his chest. "I have never been seen. Not truly. They look at me and see power, or they see terror, or they see desire wrapped in danger. They see the queen, the predator, the alien, the monster. They see beauty as a weapon I wield, grace as a trap I set." Her crimson eyes locked onto his, and he saw tears forming in them, actual tears, though they glowed faintly with that same bioluminescence. "But no one sees me. No one ever asks if perhaps the monster is tired of being monstrous. If perhaps the beautiful, terrible thing wishes, just once, to be simply herself." The vulnerability in her voice was staggering. This was Queen Thessaly stripped of all pretense, all armor, standing before him as exposed as anyone he had ever encountered. And in that moment, Eli understood the true reason he had been brought here. Not to negotiate, not to plead for colonies or bargain for lives. He had been brought here because somewhere in the vast loneliness of her empire, in the cold silence of her throne room, Thessaly had wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, there might exist one person capable of seeing past the surface. "When I look in reflective surfaces," she continued, and now the tears were falling, leaving faintly glowing trails down her cheeks, "I see what they see. I see the fangs that mark me as predator. I see the eyes that burn with hunger. I see the wings that speak of something neither fully humanoid nor fully other. I see the markings that brand me as different, as apart, as alone." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I see something that should not exist, Commander Vance. An impossibility. An aberration. Something too human to be fully monster and too monstrous to ever be truly human." She raised one hand, elegant fingers tipped with nails that could have been claws or could have been merely decorative, and gestured to her face. "This face has launched armadas and toppled kingdoms. It has been immortalized in propaganda and demonized in resistance broadcasts. Artists spend lifetimes trying to capture it, philosophers debate its meaning, poets exhaust languages attempting to describe it." Her hand trembled. "But it is not a face, Commander. It is a mask. A prison. And I am so very, very tired of wearing it. The chamber had grown darker as she spoke, the nebula light dimming as though in response to her pain. The shadows pressed closer, and Eli became aware that they were not empty. Figures stood within them, barely visible, courtiers or guards or perhaps something else entirely, all maintaining a careful distance from their queen. How long had she sat among them like this, he wondered, surrounded by subjects who adored and feared her but never truly saw her? How many centuries had she endured this isolation, this peculiar torture of being perpetually observed but never understood? Then why did you allow me to come? He asked, taking a step forward despite every survival instinct screaming at him to maintain the distance. Your fleets could have intercepted my ship at any of 100 checkpoints. Your territory is sealed tighter than a singularity's event horizon. Yet I was escorted here, through your inner sanctum, to your very throne room. Why? For a long moment she didn't answer. The wings behind her shifted slightly, catching the light, and he caught a glimpse of something that might have been star charts or might have been battle scars etched into those delicate membranes, a history written in flesh and pain. Because, she said finally, and her voice was quieter now, almost vulnerable, I wanted to see if a human would run. The admission hung in the air between them, as naked and exposed as an open wound. Run from what? He asked gently, though he already knew the answer. Queen Thessaly's fingers tightened on the armrests of her throne. The bioluminescent markings on her face pulsed faster, betraying her emotional state despite the careful neutrality of her expression. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of centuries, of battles fought not against external enemies but against the mirror's cruel reflection. From me. You asked why I allowed you to come, Thessaly said, and her voice was steadier now, as though the act of confession had given her strength. It is because humans are new to this galaxy, Commander Vance. Yeah. Unscarred by the old wars and ancient grudges. Your species looks at the universe with fresh eyes, unburdened by millennia of prejudice and preconception. She took a step closer and he could feel the heat radiating from her, could smell something like cinnamon and starfire. I wanted to know if human eyes might see something different. If perhaps, being newly emerged into this vast darkness, you might look at me and see not the monster, not the queen, not the beautiful terrible thing. She trailed off, unable or unwilling to complete the thought. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft whisper of her wings and the distant chiming of the castle's temporal mechanisms. Eli stood at a crossroads of cosmic significance, though he didn't fully understand why. Something about this moment felt pivotal, as though the weight of multiple futures hung balanced on whatever he said next. He thought of all the diplomatic training he'd received, all the careful protocols for first contact and cross-species negotiation. None of it was remotely useful here. This wasn't a diplomatic crisis. This was a person in pain. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. He half expected guards to materialize from the shadows, weapons to power up, defensive systems to activate. Instead, the chamber seemed to hold its breath. Even the mist stopped swirling, frozen in place as though the entire castle waited to see what would happen next. Your Majesty, he began, then stopped, shaking his head. No, not Your Majesty. Thessaly. Using her name felt like a transgression but also somehow necessary. May I approach? Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps, or hope so fragile it barely dared exist. She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. Eli closed the remaining distance between them, acutely aware of the fact that he was now within arm's reach of someone who could end his existence with a casual thought. This close, he could see every detail of her, the subtle iridescence of her skin, the complex patterns of her bioluminescent markings, the way her eyes weren't simply crimson but contained depths of color like looking into a nebula, reds bleeding into violets bleeding into deeper reds. She was simultaneously the most alien thing he had ever encountered and somehow heartbreakingly familiar. You say your face is scary, he said quietly, holding her gaze despite every instinct that screamed danger. You look at yourself and see a monster. He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, when she instead seemed to lean almost imperceptibly closer, he gently placed his fingers beneath her chin, tilting her face slightly upward. The contact sent electricity through his nervous system. Her skin was warm, almost hot, and impossibly soft despite its alien nature. "But that's not what I see," he continued, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I don't see a monster, Thessaly. I see someone who has carried the weight of an empire for longer than my entire species has been reaching for the stars. I see exhaustion and strength existing in the same breath. I see loneliness that would crush most beings, born with grace that most would never achieve." His thumb brushed against her cheek, wiping away one of those luminescent tears. "And yes, I see beauty. But not the kind that makes people run. The kind that makes someone want to stay." The throne room had become a cathedral of silence, every sound magnified, the whisper of her breathing, the rustle of his uniform, the distant hum of the castle's living systems. Thessaly's eyes widened at his words, and for a moment her carefully constructed mask crumbled completely. The queen vanished, and what remained was simply a woman who had waited 3,000 years to hear someone say the words he had just spoken. "You're lying," she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. "You must be. You're a diplomat trained to say what people want to hear. This is strategy, manipulation, a calculated attempt to..." "To what?" Eli interrupted gently, his hand still cradling her face. "To save the colonies? You already did that before I arrived. To gain advantage? I'm one human standing in the heart of your empire, so far from home that rescue is impossible and backup is a fantasy. There is no strategic value in what I'm saying right now, Thessaly. There's nothing to gain except perhaps the satisfaction of telling you the truth." Her wings trembled, sending ripples of light across the chamber. "The truth," she repeated as though testing the word for traps. "The truth is that you should be terrified. The truth is that I could drain the life from you before you drew your next breath. The truth is that my kind has hunted yours for sport in the old days, that we are predator and you are prey, that every instinct in your body should be screaming at you to run." Her voice was rising, desperate, as though she were trying to convince herself as much as him. "The truth is that I am dangerous, Eli Vance. I am powerful and alien and monstrous, and you should not be standing here looking at me as though you matter," he finished quietly. "As though you're more than your power or your appearance or your species. As though 3,000 years of loneliness might actually mean something to someone." She made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, a broken thing that spoke of hope trying desperately to survive in territory where it had been extinct for centuries. "You don't understand," she said, and her voice was small now, younger than her years, vulnerable in a way that probably only he would ever witness. "I have tried, Commander. I have tried to be gentle, to be kind, to show mercy and compassion. But they take my gentleness for manipulation. They interpret my mercy as strategy. Every soft word is analyzed for hidden meaning, every moment of kindness is suspected of being the setup for some elaborate cruelty." She pulled away from his touch, turning to pace the chamber, her wings unfurling partially in agitation. "Do you know what happens when I smile at someone, Eli? Truly smile, with genuine warmth and happiness? They flinch. They step back. They see my fangs and remember I am predator, and the moment is ruined." She spun to face him, and her eyes were blazing now, but with pain rather than anger. "I cannot even enjoy a sunset without someone writing intelligence reports about what strategic significance it might have. I cannot express joy without it being interpreted as mockery. I cannot show sorrow without it being dismissed as manipulation." She gestured wildly at the chamber around them. "This place, this castle, this empire, these 10,000 worlds, they are all a cage, Eli. A beautiful, terrible cage built from duty and fear and the expectations of countless billions who need me to be strong, to be powerful, to be the monster who protects them from other monsters." Her voice cracked. "But who protects the monster from herself? Who sees her when she is tired? Who holds her when the weight becomes too much? Who tells her that perhaps, just perhaps, she is allowed to be something other than what everyone needs her to be?" The raw honesty in her words was staggering. Eli had negotiated with warlords and debated with philosophers, had stared down pirates and reasoned with artificial intelligences, but he had never encountered anything like this: vulnerability from someone powerful enough to atomize planets, confession from someone who ruled nations, desperate hope from someone who had probably given up on hope millennia ago. I grew up on Mars colony, he found himself saying, surprising himself with the confession. In the underground habitats, where the sun was just a bright spot in a toxic sky and every breath depended on machines we didn't fully understand. He moved closer to her again, drawn by that raw vulnerability. When I was 10, there was a pressure breach. Killed 300 people in my sector, including my parents. The survivors looked at me with this expression I didn't understand at first, pity mixed with relief. They were glad it was me who lost family and not them. I was a reminder of their narrow escape, a walking symbol of disaster. He stopped in front of her, close enough to see his reflection in those crimson eyes. 4 years after that, I was defined by that tragedy. I was the boy who survived the breach. Not Eli, not a person with dreams and fears and hopes. Just a tragedy that had learned to walk and talk. People would see me coming and their expressions would change. Sadness, pity, discomfort. They'd treat me gently as though I might break, or they'd avoid me entirely as though grief were contagious. Thessaly was listening intently now, her agitation settling into focused attention. It took me a long time to understand that they weren't seeing me, Eli continued. They were seeing their own fear of loss, their own relief, their own discomfort with mortality. I was a mirror showing them truths they didn't want to face. And that's exhausting, being a symbol instead of a person. Being reduced to a single narrative that others have written about you. He reached out again, slower this time, asking permission with the gesture. When she didn't pull away, he took her hands in his. They were elegant hands, long-fingered and strong, and they trembled slightly at the contact. I can't pretend to understand what 3,000 years of that feels like, Thessaly. I can't imagine the weight of ruling an empire while carrying that kind of isolation. But I understand what it means to be looked at without being seen. And I understand what it means to want, just once, to be recognized as yourself rather than as the story people tell about you. Her fingers tightened around his, not painfully but desperately, as though he were a lifeline in a storm she had been weathering alone for longer than human civilization had existed. When I look at you, Eli said, and his voice was steady now, filled with quiet certainty, I don't see the propaganda broadcasts or the intelligence reports. I don't see the tyrant or the conqueror or the alien vampire queen. I see someone who has borne an impossible burden with grace, who has maintained her compassion despite centuries of isolation, who has preserved her capacity for gentleness in a universe that mistakes it for weakness. He released one of her hands to reach up again, to touch her face, to trace the line of those bioluminescent markings with gentle reverence. And yes, Thessaly, I see beauty. But not the kind that's designed to terrify or seduce or manipulate. I see the beauty of resilience. The beauty of someone who has every reason to become cold and cruel and monstrous, but who has instead remained capable of tears. Who has remained capable of hope, even if that hope is buried deep beneath layers of duty and defense. A tear slid down her cheek, catching the light, and he wiped it away with his thumb. So no, he said softly. Your face is not scary. Your face is the face of someone who has survived things that would have destroyed others. Your face is the face of loneliness acknowledged and carried regardless. Your face is the face of power that has chosen, again and again, to be tempered with mercy even when mercy was mistaken for manipulation. He smiled at her, and it was genuine, warm, completely free of fear or calculation. You are not the most beautiful thing in the galaxy because of your features or your presence or your power, Thessaly. You are the most beautiful thing in the galaxy because despite everything, despite the isolation, despite the misunderstanding, despite 3,000 years of being alone in a crowd, you are still capable of this moment. Still capable of vulnerability. Still capable of hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone might see you. The silence that followed was profound, but it was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a held breath, of a moment balanced between what was and what might be. Thessaly's eyes searched his face and he let her look, let her see whatever she needed to see. He watched her expression shift through a dozen emotions: disbelief, hope, fear, wonder, and finally something that might have been the first stirrings of trust. Her wings, which had been held tense and partially unfurled, slowly relaxed, folding more naturally against her back. "You're not afraid of me," she said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement of wonder, as though she were observing an impossibility made manifest. "Oh, I'm terrified," Eli admitted with a small laugh. "You could end me with a thought. I'm standing in the heart of an empire that could erase Earth without breaking stride, holding hands with someone who has personally commanded fleets that made stars tremble." His expression softened. "But I'm not afraid of your face, Thessaly. I'm not afraid of your appearance or your nature. The fear I feel has nothing to do with fangs or wings or glowing eyes. It's the normal fear of someone who's trying very hard not to screw up what might be the most important moment of his life." A sound escaped her, a laugh, genuine and surprised, as though the response had been startled out of her by his honest ridiculousness. It transformed her face, that laugh, softening lines that had been held tense for who knew how long, bringing light to her eyes that had nothing to do with their crimson glow. In that moment, she was simply beautiful, without qualification or complication. A woman experiencing a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. "You're ridiculous," she said, but there was affection in her voice, a warmth he suspected few had ever heard from her. "I've been called worse by better," he replied with a grin. "Usually by my commanding officers, right before they sent me on missions that should have gotten me killed." She laughed again, and the sound echoed through the throne room like music in a place that had forgotten song. The shadows seemed to lighten, the oppressive weight of the chamber easing as though even the castle itself was responding to this shift in its mistress's mood. They stood there in the transformed throne room, hands still joined, the space between them charged with possibility. Around them, the castle seemed to be reshaping itself subtly, the mist receding, the shadows pulling back, the nebula light streaming through the windows growing warmer, shifting from hostile crimson toward something closer to the soft red-violet of a planetary sunset. "I don't know how to do this," Thessaly admitted quietly, her voice carrying a vulnerability that was somehow stronger than any show of force could have been. 3,000 years Eli and I have forgotten, or perhaps never learned, how to simply be with someone. How to exist in a space without strategy or caution or the constant calculation of threat assessment." She looked down at their joined hands as though trying to memorize the sight. "My kind, we are not like yours. We do not form casual bonds. We do not engage in frivolous social interaction. Every connection is significant, potentially eternal, weighted with meaning that transcends the temporary." She raised her eyes to his again, and in them, he could see the depth of what she was offering, not just acknowledgement of his words, but the beginning of trust from someone for whom trust was not freely given. "Among my people," she continued, "to be truly seen by another is to form a bond that cannot easily be broken. It is rare, precious, and dangerous because it creates vulnerability where none existed before." Her wings shifted, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as nervousness. "I have been a queen for so long that I had forgotten there might be another way to exist. That perhaps, beneath the crown and the duty and the terrible reputation, there might still be a person capable of connection." Eli listened, understanding that this was more than confession. This was invitation and warning, hope and fear, all wrapped together in an offering that probably cost her more than military defeat ever could. "In my culture," he responded carefully, matching her honesty with his own, "we have a saying, 'To be known is to be loved.' It's not quite true, of course. There are people who are known and hated, understood and rejected. But the core of it, the hope embedded in those words, is that genuine understanding creates the possibility for genuine connection." He squeezed her hands gently. "You're right that we're different species, different cultures, separated by millennia of evolution and experience. But loneliness is universal, Thessaly. The desire to be seen, to be understood, to matter to someone beyond utility or fear, that transcends biology." He took a breath, aware that his next words would commit him to something far larger than a diplomatic mission. "I can't promise you perfect understanding. I'm going to make mistakes, misread situations, fail to grasp nuances that are obvious to you. I'm human and young by your standards, and probably impossibly naive about the realities of your existence." He met her gaze steadily. "But I can promise you honesty. I can promise you that when I look at you I will try, genuinely try, to see you rather than the symbol. And I can promise you that whatever fear I feel, it will never be fear of your face, your nature, or your truth. Something shifted in her expression, a decision being made in real time. The bioluminescent markings on her face pulsed more brightly, and he felt rather than saw a change in the chamber around them, the watching presence of courtiers or guards withdrawing further, granting them a sphere of privacy that was both physical and somehow metaphysical. You understand, Thessaly said slowly, that if I accept this, if I allow myself to believe that you might truly see me, you will become the most dangerous person in my empire. It wasn't a threat but a statement of fact. Not because you would wield power over me, but because you would hold something infinitely more valuable and vulnerable than military advantage or political leverage. You would hold the truth of who I am beneath the masks. And that, Eli Vance, is a responsibility heavier than ruling worlds. I understand, he said, and he did, perhaps not fully, not yet, but enough to recognize the weight of what she was offering. But I think maybe the question isn't whether I can bear that responsibility. The question is whether you can bear to continue as you have been, alone and unseen, for another 3,000 years. Her breath caught, a small sound barely audible but profound in its significance. Because in that moment she recognized the truth he had spoken. The status quo, the isolation, the terrible loneliness of her existence was not sustainable. Perhaps it had never been. Perhaps she had simply endured it for so long that she had forgotten there might be alternatives. I am tired, she admitted, and her voice was raw with a confession. So very, very tired, Eli. Tired of being strong. Tired of being feared. Tired of ruling and judging and commanding. Tired of the masks and the strategies and the endless calculation of every word, every gesture, every expression. Her wings sagged slightly, as though the weight of centuries was finally being acknowledged. Just once, I want to be something other than queen. Just once, I want to exist without the constant awareness of how I appear, what message I'm sending, what threat I represent. She stepped closer to him, and now they were near enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her alien physiology, could see the minute details of those fascinating markings on her skin, could watch the play of muscles beneath that perfect, terrible face as emotions crossed it with unguarded honesty. Will you give me that? She asked, and her voice was barely above a whisper. Will you give me a moment, just one moment, where I am not the monster or the queen or the beautiful terrible thing but simply, myself? Yes, Eli said without hesitation. Yes, Thessaly. But I can't give you a moment. A moment is too brief, too fleeting, gone before you can even truly experience it. He released one of her hands to cup her face, his palm warm against her luminescent skin. I can give you now. This present space for as long as you need it, where you don't have to be anything except who you are. Her eyes closed and more of those glowing tears escaped, trailing down her cheeks like falling stars. He wiped them away gently, each touch a promise, each gesture an acknowledgement of her reality. When her eyes opened again, they were still crimson, still alien, still marked by centuries of power and pain, but they were also simply eyes, belonging to a person who was allowing herself to be vulnerable. I don't remember the last time someone touched me with gentleness, she said, and her voice broke slightly on the words. Every contact is formal, ritualized, laden with significance. Even my court physicians approach me with reverence that makes simple medical attention feel like religious ceremony. I am handled like a weapon, treated like a force of nature, maintained like strategic asset. She leaned into his touch, and the gesture was heartbreaking in its need. This, she whispered. This simple thing that you're doing right now, this casual intimacy of comfort. I had forgotten it existed. Eli understood then, with crystal clarity, exactly how profound her isolation had been. It wasn't just emotional or psychological. It was physical, tactile, embedded in every interaction. She was queen, sovereign, untouchable in every sense of the word. The weight of that realization settled over him like a mantle, and he understood that what he was offering her wasn't just validation or understanding. It was the revolutionary concept that she might be touched without ceremony, held without agenda, treated as a person rather than an icon. Come here, he said softly and opened his arms. She stared at him for a moment, incomprehension written across her features, as though the gesture were so foreign that she couldn't immediately parse its meaning. Then understanding dawned, and her expression transformed into something that might have been wonder or might have been fear or might have been both, so thoroughly intertwined that they couldn't be separated. "I don't," she started, then stopped. "I haven't," again the words failed. Finally, almost inaudibly, "I don't know how." The admission was staggering. Someone who commanded fleets and ruled empires, reduced to confusion by the simple offer of an embrace. Eli felt his heart break a little more, felt the full weight of her isolation settle over him like a physical thing. "There's no wrong way," he said gently. "No protocol or procedure. You just come here. Let me hold you. That's all. No meaning beyond the moment. No strategy or significance. Just comfort if you want it." She took a step forward, hesitant, as though approaching something that might vanish if she moved too quickly. Then another step. And then, with a sound that was half sob and half surrender, she closed the remaining distance and let herself fall into his embrace. The moment Thessaly's body made contact with his, Eli understood just how much strength she had been using to hold herself separate from the world. She didn't simply accept the embrace. She collapsed into it, her considerable height causing her to bow slightly as she buried her face against his shoulder, her arms wrapping around him with desperate intensity, her wings folding forward to enclose them both in a cocoon of translucent membrane that filtered the nebula light into shades of crimson and violet. She was warm, almost hot, her body temperature significantly higher than human standard. He could feel the rapid beating of her heart, the trembling that ran through her frame, the way her breath came in shuddering gasps as though she were fighting against years of conditioning that told her this vulnerability was dangerous, foolish, forbidden. "I've got you," he murmured, one hand moving to the back of her head, fingers threading through that impossibly soft silver hair, while his other arm wrapped securely around her waist. "You're safe. You're allowed to feel this. You're allowed to need this." A sound escaped her, something between a laugh and a sob, broken and beautiful and utterly human despite her alien nature. Her hands clutched at his uniform, holding him with a strength that would have been painful if not for the obvious care she took not to hurt him. He could feel her fangs pressing lightly against his shoulder through the fabric, could feel the slight prick of her nails where they gripped him, could feel every tremor that ran through her as emotions she had suppressed for centuries came flooding to the surface. "This is dangerous," she gasped out against his shoulder, her voice muffled and thick with tears. "This feeling, this vulnerability, it's everything I've been taught to avoid. Every instinct tells me to push you away, to restore distance, to rebuild the walls." Her arms tightened around him. "But I can't. God and stars, Eli, I can't. I don't want to. Even knowing the risk, even understanding how this makes me weak." "It doesn't make you weak," he interrupted firmly, his hand moving in slow, soothing circles on her back, careful to avoid her wings. "Vulnerability isn't weakness, Thessaly. It's courage. It takes far more strength to allow yourself to feel than it does to shut feeling down. You've been strong in the old way for 3,000 years. Maybe it's time to be strong in a new way." She pulled back slightly, just enough to look at him, and her face was a mess, tears streaming down her cheeks, her eyes red-rimmed, which should have been impossible given they were already crimson, but somehow the emotional redness was visible anyway, her expression raw and open and completely unguarded. She was, in that moment, the furthest thing from the terrifying queen of propaganda broadcast. She was simply a person overwhelmed by feeling, by connection, by the terrifying relief of being seen. "You said I was the most beautiful thing in the galaxy," she said, and her voice was wondering, testing the words as though trying to determine if they might be true. "But look at me now. I'm a wreck. My face is—" She touched her own cheek, feeling the tears, and her expression crumpled further. "Even my tears aren't normal. Even my breakdown is alien, marked by this damned bioluminescence that makes everything I do seem theatrical, designed, performed rather than felt." Eli caught her hand, the one touching her face, and brought it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. The gesture seemed to startle her into stillness. "Your tears glow," he said softly, "because everything about you contains its own light. That's not theater, Thessaly. That's truth made visible. You couldn't hide what you're feeling right now even if you tried, and that's exactly what makes it real. He guided her hand to his own face, pressing her palm against his cheek. Feel that? I'm terrified right now. My heart is racing. My hands are shaking. I'm standing in the throne room of the most powerful being in known space, holding her while she cries, and I have absolutely no idea if I'm doing this right or saying the right things or making everything worse. He smiled at her, small and genuine. But I'm here. And you're here. And nothing about this moment is performed or designed or theatrical. It's just two people who are both scared and both trying and both hoping that maybe, just maybe, genuine connection is possible. She searched his face, her alien eyes studying every detail as though trying to memorize this moment against the possibility that it might never come again. Why? She asked finally. Why would you do this? Risk this? I am everything your species has been taught to fear. I am the nightmare scenario, the alien threat, the monster in the darkness between stars. My kind has attacked human colonies. We've destroyed ships. You've also enforced the Treaty of the Cold Nebula, Eli interrupted gently, which has prevented 3 separate wars that would have consumed billions of lives. You've maintained trade routes that feed my entire species. You've created stability in regions that would otherwise collapse into chaos and horror. He brushed a strand of silver hair from her face. Yes, your empire has blood in its history. So does mine. So does everyone's who has survived long enough to build something lasting. The question isn't whether you're perfect or whether your past is unblemished. The question is whether you're capable of choosing mercy when power would be easier. And you've proven that you are, again and again. They call me merciful out of fear, she protested weakly. They think I spare them as a cat toys with a mouse, prolonging the game. And yet you still spare them, he countered. Regardless of what they think, regardless of whether they give you credit or twist your actions into malice, you still choose mercy. That speaks to character, Thessaly. That speaks to who you are when you could be anything. She stared at him, and he watched as understanding settled over her features. The radical concept that perhaps her actions mattered more than others' interpretations of them, that her choices defined her regardless of how they were perceived. It was such a simple idea, but for someone who had spent millennia being defined by others' fears and projections, it seemed to hit with the force of revelation. I want to believe you, she said, and her voice was small, almost childlike in its honesty. I want to believe that I am not the monster. That perhaps there is value in who I am beyond my utility as a symbol of terror. That maybe, she broke off, swallowing hard. That maybe someone could look at me and see worth rather than threat. See person rather than power. See you, Eli finished. Not the role you play or the responsibilities you carry or the power you wield. Just you, Thessaly, whoever that is beneath the crown and the duty and the 3,000 years of accumulated expectation. I don't know who that is anymore, she whispered, and the admission was clearly painful. I have been queen for so long. I have worn the mask until it feels more real than whatever face might lie beneath it. When I try to think of myself outside of duty, outside of role, I find nothing. Emptiness. A blank space where a self should be. The throne room had grown very quiet around them, the castle itself seeming to listen to this confession. Eli kept his arms around her, kept her grounded in the physical present while she grappled with existential absence. Then we'll find out together, he said simply. You don't have to know who you are right now. You don't have to have answers or identity or perfect self-understanding. You just have to be willing to explore the question. He pulled back slightly so he could look directly into her eyes. Start small. Right now, in this moment, setting aside everything else. What do you want? She blinked at him, clearly surprised by the question. Want? Want? He confirmed. Not what your empire needs. Not what duty demands. Not what protocol suggests. What does Thessaly, the person standing in my arms, want right now? He watched her wrestle with the question, watched her face shift through confusion and consideration and something that might have been fear of the answer. It was clear that the question itself was revolutionary, that perhaps no one had asked her what she wanted, divorced from strategic consideration, in longer than she could remember. I want, she started, then stopped, then started again. I want not to be alone. The words came out in a rush as though she had to say them quickly before courage failed. I want to matter to someone for reasons that have nothing to do with my power or my position. I want to be touched without ceremony. I want to be seen without fear. Her voice cracked. I want this moment to be real, Eli. Not a manipulation or a dream or some temporary aberration that will dissolve when reality reasserts itself. I want this to be real. It is real, he assured her, his arms tightening around her. This moment, this connection, what you're feeling right now, all of it is real, Thessaly. Maybe the most real thing that's happened to either of us in a very long time. She studied his face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, searching for any hint of deception or mockery or hidden agenda. Whatever she saw, or didn't see, must have satisfied her because slowly, carefully, she let herself relax into the embrace again, let herself accept the comfort and connection being offered. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and in the protective cocoon of her wings, while the nebula light painted them in shades of blood and starlight and the castle held its breath around them. There was no sound except their breathing, no movement except the gentle rise and fall of their chests, no awareness except each other and the profound significance of this moment where Queen became simply woman, where human and alien discovered the universal truth of loneliness recognized and eased. Eli, she said eventually, her voice muffled against his shoulder, I need you to understand something. What we're doing here, it's not just personal. In my culture, to be allowed to see someone's vulnerability, to be granted access to their unguarded self, creates a bond. A deep one. If we continue this, if I allow this connection to form fully, it will bind us in ways that transcend simple affection or companionship. She pulled back to look at him again, and her expression was serious, weighted with the significance of what she was saying. I will be able to sense you across vast distances. Your emotions will echo in me. Your pain will be my pain, your joy my joy. And if something were to happen to you, if you were hurt or killed, it would break something in me that might never heal. Her hands framed his face, elegant and deadly and infinitely gentle. I am offering you this not as queen to subject, not as alien to human, but as one soul to another. But you need to understand the price. You need to choose this knowingly. Eli felt the weight of her words, the significance of what she was describing. It was far beyond human concepts of relationship, beyond casual connection or even deep partnership. What she was describing was a melding of existence, a bond that would reshape both of them. And you, he asked quietly, if I choose this, if we form this bond, what happens to you? Because it sounds like everything you're describing goes both ways. My pain becomes yours, but yours becomes mine. If I'm hurt, you feel it, but if you're hurt, I feel it too. If this bond could break you, Thessaly, it could break me just as easily. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, sad and knowing. Yes, she confirmed. It is not a burden I place only on you. It is a shared vulnerability, a mutual risk. For 3,000 years, I have avoided this specifically because of what it would mean, what it would cost, how much of myself I would have to entrust to another. Her thumbs brushed across his cheekbones. But I find here and now that I am tired of safety. I am tired of protection. I am tired of ruling and eternal and alone. She took a breath, and her eyes locked onto his with fierce intensity. So I am offering you this choice, Eli Vance. Walk away now, complete your diplomatic mission, return to your people knowing you saved 3 million lives and saw beneath the mask of the galaxy's most feared queen. That would be enough. That would be meaningful. You owe me nothing more. Or, he prompted, knowing there had to be an alternative. Or stay, she said, and her voice trembled slightly. Stay and form this bond with me. Stay and become the first being in 3,000 years to truly know me. Stay and accept that your life will never be the same, that you will be marked by this connection in ways that transcend normal understanding. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched, her eyes closing. Stay and let me be not alone, Eli. Stay and teach me how to be someone other than Queen. Stay and show me what it means to matter to someone for reasons that have nothing to do with terror or power or duty. The silence that followed was profound. Eli could feel the weight of the moment, could sense that what happened next would ripple outward in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. This was more than personal choice. This was the intersection of civilizations, the moment where isolation ended and connection began, the pivot point upon which entire futures might balance. Eli stood in that space between breaths, between heartbeats, between one life and another. Every rational part of his mind was screaming warnings. This was beyond his authority, beyond his understanding, beyond the scope of what he had been sent here to accomplish. He was a commander, yes, but also just a man, human and limited and probably in far over his head. To accept what Thessaly was offering would change everything. His life, his duty, his very understanding of what was possible. But then he looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the power and the alien beauty and the 3,000 years of accumulated legend. He saw exhaustion. He saw hope struggling to survive in hostile territory. He saw someone offering the most valuable thing she possessed, her authentic, unguarded self, and waiting to see if it would be rejected or accepted. He thought about the colonies he'd been sent to save, the 3 million lives hanging in the balance. That mission was complete before he'd even arrived. There was no strategic reason to stay, no diplomatic advantage to be gained. Everything from this point forward would be purely personal choice, unconnected to duty or obligation. He thought about Mars colony, about growing up in the underground habitats where connection was precious and isolation was death. He thought about losing his parents and becoming a symbol rather than a person, about the years spent learning to wear masks because showing his real face only made others uncomfortable. He thought about the moment years ago, when he decided that if he ever found someone willing to truly see him, he would have the courage to be seen. And he realized that the same choice was being offered to Thessaly, just from the other direction. She had spent 3,000 years being the symbol, wearing the mask, keeping herself separate because vulnerability was too dangerous. And now she was asking if perhaps, just perhaps, there might be someone willing to take that risk with her. "You say it will bind us," Eli said slowly, his hands moving to cover hers where they still framed his face. "That I'll be able to sense you, feel your emotions, share your pain and joy. That if something happens to either of us, it will break something in the other." "Yes," Thessaly confirmed, her voice barely audible. "And you say this will change my life, mark me, make it so I can never go back to what I was before." "Yes," she said again, and he could hear the fear in that single syllable. Fear that he would recognize the price and choose the sensible path of withdrawal. Eli smiled, and it was genuine, warm, completely free of hesitation. "Good," he said simply. Her eyes snapped open, confusion evident in those crimson depths. "Good? Good," he repeated. "Because a life unchanged is a life not fully lived, Thessaly. And I didn't cross the cold nebula, survive the morning stars, and stand in the throne room of the most powerful being in known space just to play it safe." His smile widened. "You're offering me connection, real and deep and meaningful. You're offering me the chance to matter to someone, to be seen and known and valued for who I am rather than what I represent. You're offering me the possibility of not being alone." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing first one palm and then the other, each gesture a promise. "So yes, Thessaly. Yes to the bond. Yes to the shared vulnerability. Yes to the mutual risk and the changed life and the marking that can't be undone." He met her gaze steadily. "Yes to staying. Yes to teaching you how to be more than queen. Yes to learning who you are beneath the crown." His voice softened. "Yes to you." For a moment, she simply stared at him, as though unable to process that he had actually said what she had desperately hoped to hear. Then something shifted in her expression. A transformation so profound it was like watching ice melt in the sun, like watching someone who had been holding their breath for centuries finally exhale. "You're certain?" she whispered, and her voice was trembling. "You understand what you're accepting? Once this bond forms, it cannot be easily broken. You will be marked as mine in ways that other beings will be able to sense. Your life expectancy will extend to match mine. 3,000 years will seem brief compared to what stretches ahead of you. You will be part of my world, my empire, my existence in ways that will supersede your human connections." "I understand," Eli said, and he did, perhaps not fully, perhaps not completely, but enough to make the choice with open eyes. "I understand that this is big, Thessaly. Cosmic level significant. I understand that I'm probably not fully grasping all the implications. But I also understand that some moments are worth the risk. Some connections are worth the price. Some people are worth choosing even when, especially when, the choice is difficult. She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You're insane. Beautifully, impossibly insane. You should run. You should flee back to your ship and report that the alien vampire queen is too dangerous for diplomatic contact and your people should avoid this sector entirely. Probably, he agreed cheerfully. But I've never been particularly good at doing what I should do. I'm much better at doing what feels right, even when it looks ridiculous from the outside. He leaned forward until their foreheads touched again. And this, this moment, feels more right than anything I've ever done. Thessaly's arms wrapped around him again, but this time the embrace was different. Less desperate, more sure, a claiming and a promise and a commitment all wrapped into one gesture. Then I accept your choice, she said, her voice formal despite the emotion in it, as though she were speaking words of ritual that had weight beyond their surface meaning. I accept your yes, Eli Vance of Mars Colony, commander of the human diplomatic fleet. I accept your willingness to be bound to me, to share in my existence, to become part of my truth. She pulled back slightly, and he watched as the bioluminescent markings on her face began to pulse faster, brighter, the light spreading from her cheekbones down her neck, across her shoulders, racing along her arms until her entire body seemed to glow from within. Her wings unfurled fully, and they too lit up with that inner radiance, creating a display that was both beautiful and slightly terrifying in its intensity. This will hurt, she warned, her voice taking on harmonics that suggested multiple tones speaking in unison. Not physically but here, she placed her hand over his heart. It will feel like burning and drowning and flying all at once. It will feel like too much, like more than you can contain. Don't fight it. Don't try to protect yourself. Let it happen, let it fill you, let it change you. Eli nodded, bracing himself without really knowing what he was bracing for. I'm ready, he said and hoped it was true. Thessaly's eyes began to glow brighter, the crimson intensifying until it seemed like she was looking at him through pools of liquid fire. She raised her other hand to mirror the first, both palms now pressed flat against his chest, directly over his heart. The heat of her touch increased, not burning but certainly hot, and he could feel something building in the air around them. A pressure, a presence, a sense of reality bending to accommodate something that was about to happen. Then receive me, she said, and her voice was no longer entirely her own. It was older, deeper, resonant with power that went beyond personal force. Receive my truth, my pain, my loneliness and joy and hope and despair. Receive 3,000 years of existence compressed into this moment of connection. Receive me, Eli Vance, and let me receive you in return. The throne room exploded with light. Or perhaps it was his perception that exploded, it was impossible to tell. Suddenly, Eli was aware of more than just himself, more than just the immediate present. He could feel Thessaly's consciousness pressing against his own, vast and ancient and terrifyingly deep, layer upon layer of memory and experience and existence that stretched back before his entire species had left their home planet. He felt her loneliness, not as concept but as lived reality, centuries of it, millennia of it, an isolation so profound and persistent that it had become the background radiation of her existence. He felt her power, vast and terrible, the ability to reshape matter with thought, to command forces that could crack planets, to hold together an empire through sheer force of will. He felt her fear that she was becoming the monster, fear that isolation was changing her in ways she couldn't reverse, fear that perhaps there was no longer anyone real beneath the masks. And beneath all of it, buried so deep that she had almost forgotten it existed, he felt hope. Small and stubborn and refusing to die despite having every reason to do so, a tiny flame of belief that perhaps, someday somehow things might be different. The feelings crashed over him like a tsunami, and he understood why she had warned him. It was too much, far too much for a human consciousness to process, overwhelming in its intensity and scope. He felt like he was drowning in her existence, like his own identity was being swept away in the flood of hers. But then, beneath his hands, which he realized were now gripping her waist with desperate intensity, he felt her trembling. Despite the vast power, despite the ancient existence, Despite everything that made her seem almost godlike in her capabilities, she was trembling. Because even as he was being overwhelmed by her, she was being overwhelmed by him. He felt his emotions as she experienced them. His fear and determination, his hope and uncertainty, his loneliness that was measured in years rather than millennia but was no less real for its brevity. He felt his compassion as it registered in her consciousness, so unexpected and undeserved in her understanding that it hit her like a physical blow. He felt his choice, his yes, his willingness to accept her despite everything, and he felt how much that mattered to her, how profoundly significant it was that someone had chosen her rather than being coerced or compelled. The bond was forming between them, a connection that was part telepathic and part something else entirely, something that had no word in human language. It was terrifying and exhilarating, drowning and flying, exactly as she had warned. But beneath the overwhelming intensity there was also something else: recognition. Two lonely beings finding each other across the void. Two individuals who had been seen as symbols rather than people, discovering someone willing to look past the surface. Two souls who had been alone in their own ways, forming a connection that transcended species and time and the vast differences in their existence. The light began to fade, gradually, and Eli became aware of the physical world again. He was on his knees. When had that happened? With Thessaly kneeling in front of him, her hands still pressed against his chest, his hands still gripping her waist. Both of them were trembling, both breathing hard as though they'd run a marathon, both looking at each other with eyes that now held recognition far deeper than visual identification. "I can feel you," Eli gasped out, and it was true. There was a presence in his mind that wasn't his own, a awareness of Thessaly that went beyond seeing or hearing. He could sense her emotional state, could feel the echo of her thoughts, could perceive her existence as a tangible thing rather than just an observation. "God, Thessaly, I can feel you. You're right here." He pressed his hand more firmly against her side. "But also here." He touched his chest, his heart. "How is this possible?" She was crying again, those luminescent tears streaming down her face, but she was also smiling. Genuinely, fully, radiantly smiling in a way that transformed her entire appearance. "I told you," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I told you it would bind us. I can feel you too, Eli. Your courage, your compassion, your ridiculous optimistic hope that makes no logical sense given the state of the universe but exists anyway." She laughed, the sound bright and unburdened. "You're in here," she touched her own chest, mirroring his gesture. "A part of me now. Human and limited and absurdly brave. How did I exist without this? How did I survive 3,000 years without knowing what it felt like to have someone present in my awareness?" They knelt there together, adjusting to the new reality of their existence, the bond settling into place like a puzzle piece finally finding its match. Around them, the throne room had changed again. The light was warmer, the shadows less oppressive, as though the castle itself was responding to the shift in its mistress's emotional state. Or perhaps it was responding to the bond, recognizing that she was no longer alone and adjusting accordingly. "This is going to complicate everything," Eli said eventually, though there was no regret in his voice, just awareness of practical reality. "Yes," Thessaly agreed, helping him to his feet with effortless strength. "My court will be in an uproar. The blood courts will have opinions. Your human government will probably consider this a security breach of catastrophic proportions." She grinned at him, and there was mischief in it, genuine playfulness that seemed utterly incongruous with her reputation. "But they'll have to deal with it because I am not giving this up. I'm not giving you up. They can adjust their expectations accordingly." There was steel beneath the playfulness, a queen's authority reasserting itself, but now Eli could feel the difference. Before, that authority had been wielded out of duty and necessity. Now it was being wielded out of choice and protection of what they had just created together. "What happens now?" he asked, aware that they were standing at a threshold between one reality and another. Thessaly considered the question, her expression growing thoughtful. "Now," she said slowly, "we figure out how to exist in this new configuration. Now I learn how to be more than queen, and you learn how to be more than diplomat. Now we discover who we are when we don't have to be alone anymore." She reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Now we begin. The throne room had fully transformed by the time they finally stopped simply existing in each other's presence and began to consider practical reality. The oppressive darkness had lifted, replaced by a warm luminescence that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The nebula light streaming through the stained glass windows had shifted to softer hues, still predominantly crimson and violet, but now touched with gold and silver that created patterns like permanent sunset. The mist had receded entirely, and where there had been threatening shadows, there were now simply architectural features rendered beautiful by the changed lighting. Thessaly led Eli through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they walked, the castle responding to her emotional state in real time. What had been gothic and intimidating now revealed hidden beauty, delicate filigree in the stonework, bioluminescent patterns in the walls that created moving artworks, windows that opened onto impossible vistas of nebulae and star fields that might have been real or might have been artistic interpretation of her empire's scope. "The castle is alive," she explained as they walked, her hands still firmly clasped in his. "Not sentient exactly but responsive. It was grown rather than built, engineered from living stone and biotechnology over the course of centuries. It reacts to my presence, to my emotions, to my needs." She glanced at him and he could feel her amusement through the bond. "Right now it's probably very confused. I haven't been this emotionally positive I don't actually remember how long." They emerged onto a balcony that overlooked impossible distances. Spread out before them was the heart of the Nocturnus Empire, not a planet but a constructed megastructure, a ring that encircled an entire star, cities and territories sprawling across its inner surface, ships moving in streams of light between docking stations, energy patterns that might have been power grids or might have been art installations or might have been both. "This is the Crimson Crown," Thessaly said, gesturing to the megastructure. "Heart of my empire, home to 13 billion souls of 100 different species. From here, I govern 10,000 worlds, mediate disputes across light years, maintain the peace that prevents the galaxy from tearing itself apart in another war of the ancients." She was quiet for a moment, and Eli could feel her pride in what she had built, but also the weight of it. "It is magnificent and terrible and exhausting, and I have never been able to share it with anyone who saw it as more than a strategic asset or a target." Eli looked out at the megastructure, at the sheer scale of what she had created and maintained, and felt a moment of vertigo, not from the height of the balcony but from the sudden understanding of exactly how vast her responsibilities were. This wasn't just ruling a country or even a planet. This was holding together a galactic civilization through sheer force of will and authority. "You can feel it, can't you?" Thessaly asked quietly. "Through the bond. You can feel the weight of it now." He nodded slowly. "It's like gravity," he said, searching for words to describe what he was sensing through their connection. "Like standing at the bottom of a gravity well so deep that every movement requires conscious effort. How do you carry this, Thessaly? How have you carried this for 3,000 years?" She was quiet for a long moment, her expression distant as she looked out over her empire. "Because the alternative was chaos," she said finally. "Because someone had to do it and I had the power and the longevity and the will to see it through. Because every time I considered walking away I would think about the wars before the empire, about the genocides and the destroyed worlds and the species rendered extinct because no one could or would enforce peace." Her hand tightened on his. "But it has been lonely, Eli. So very lonely, standing at the center of all this, maintaining order through authority that everyone fears but no one truly respects." Eli turned to her, and through the bond he could feel the complexity of her emotions, the pride and the exhaustion, the satisfaction and the isolation, the deep need for her work to matter balanced against the bone-deep weariness of carrying it alone. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," he said quietly. "I know I don't have your power or your longevity or your experience. I know I'm human and limited and probably absurdly unqualified to help rule a galactic empire. But I'm here, Thessaly. And maybe that's enough, not to share the burden but to share the existence. To be someone who sees not just the empire but the person maintaining it." She turned to him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears again. "That's more than enough," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That's everything." She pulled him close, and he went willingly, wrapping his arms around her as her wings folded protectively around them both. I don't need you to help rule, Eli. I don't need you to be anything other than what you are, someone who sees me. Someone who chose to stay when you could have left. Someone who is present in my awareness in a way that makes the isolation bearable. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other while the empire spread out below them like a map of possibilities. Eli could feel her slowly relaxing, the constant tension she carried beginning to ease as she allowed herself to simply exist rather than constantly govern. My people are going to panic, he said eventually, practical reality reasserting itself. I was supposed to negotiate the release of the Outer Verge colonies and return with a treaty. I wasn't supposed to form a psychic bond with the alien vampire queen and decide to stay at the heart of her empire. He felt her amusement through the bond before she spoke. Yes, your superiors are probably going to be quite concerned. We should probably send them a message. Something diplomatic and reassuring that doesn't cause an interstellar incident. How about, mission successful? Colonies saved. Ambassador staying to establish permanent diplomatic relations. Please send my things? Eli suggested with a grin. Thessaly laughed, a real laugh full and unburdened. Somehow I doubt that will be sufficient to prevent panic. Perhaps we should include some formal treaty language about cultural exchange and alliance building. We could, Eli agreed. Or we could tell them the truth, that I found something here worth staying for, and if they want to maintain diplomatic relations with the Nocturnus Empire, they're going to have to get used to the fact that their ambassador is personally bonded to their empress. Through the connection, he felt her surprise and then her pleasure at his matter-of-fact acceptance of the situation. You're not concerned about how this looks? About the political implications? About the accusations that might come, that you've been compromised or turned or seduced by the enemy? Eli shrugged. Let them talk. I know the truth, you know the truth, and thanks to this bond, we both know that what happened here was genuine choice rather than manipulation. Anyone who wants to make it into something else is welcome to their opinions. I'm not going to defend or justify the most meaningful decision I've ever made. He felt a wave of affection from her, so strong it nearly staggered him. Through the bond, he understood that his casual dismissal of others' opinions meant more to her than any grand declaration could have, because it was exactly what she had been doing for 3,000 years, maintaining her course regardless of what others thought or said or believed. We should go inside, Thessaly said eventually, though she seemed reluctant to end the moment. There are people who need to meet you, my court, my advisors, the leaders of the blood courts. They're probably already in a state of high alert, sensing that something significant has happened. She smiled at him. Your arrival was noted, of course, but my court knows better than to interrupt when I'm in my throne room. They've been waiting, wondering what's happening, probably assuming negotiations or interrogation or perhaps your execution. Well, this will be a surprise then, Eli said dryly. You have no idea, Thessaly replied with a grin that showed her fangs. The last time I brought someone into my private chambers, it was an admiral who had betrayed his fleet to the enemy, and I had him tried and executed in front of the entire court as an example. The time before that was a philosopher who had accused me of being a soulless monster, and I debated him for 16 hours straight until he admitted I had a point about utilitarian ethics. She paused. This will be different. They re-entered the castle, moving through corridors that continued to shift and change, responding to Thessaly's improved emotional state. Eli noticed details he had missed on the way in, beautiful murals that told stories in visual languages he couldn't read, chambers that opened onto impossible geometries, technologies that blurred the line between science and art until they were indistinguishable. Your castle is incredible, he said, craning his neck to look at a ceiling that seemed to display real-time star charts of the entire empire. It's like walking through someone's imagination given physical form. That's not far from the truth, Thessaly replied. The castle was designed to be an extension of my consciousness, a physical manifestation of my authority and will. When I'm calm, it's serene. When I'm angry, it becomes labyrinthine and hostile. When I'm sad, she trailed off, gesturing to what the throne room had been when he arrived. Well, you saw that. And now? Eli asked, noting the warm light and beautiful architecture. Now it's confused, she admitted with a laugh. I haven't felt like this in so long that the castle doesn't have established patterns to fall back on. So it's improvising, trying to interpret joy and connection and hope, none of which have been dominant emotions for me in centuries. She squeezed his hand. You're literally reshaping my world, Eli. Not metaphorically, literally. The castle is changing because you're here and I'm happy about it. They arrived at a massive set of doors, easily 30 feet tall, made of a dark metal that seemed to absorb light, with intricate carvings that moved and shifted as he watched. Guards flanked the doors. Not human, not quite like Thessaly either, but clearly of the same general species. They wore armor that seemed to be grown rather than forged, all flowing curves and organic lines that suggested both protection and artistry. The guards' eyes widened as they saw Thessaly approaching hand in hand with a human, and Eli felt their shock ripple through the air like a physical force. They immediately knelt, but their confusion was palpable. Your Majesty, the guard on the left said, his voice carrying harmonics similar to Thessaly's. The court is assembled and awaits your presence. They were concerned when... He broke off, clearly unsure how to phrase whatever they had sensed. When the throne room lit up like a supernova and psychic echoes of the bonding ritual rippled across the entire megastructure? Thessaly supplied helpfully. Yes, I imagine they were concerned. Let's not keep them waiting. The doors swung open and sound washed over them, the murmur of hundreds of voices, all falling silent the moment Thessaly appeared. The chamber beyond was vast, a throne room that made the private chamber Eli had first entered look small by comparison. Balconies rose in tiers on either side, packed with courtiers and nobles and representatives of species he didn't recognize. At the far end, another throne, this one clearly meant for public audience rather than private contemplation. But it was the silence that was most striking. Hundreds of beings, all staring, all processing the impossible sight of their queen entering hand in hand with a human, both of them still wearing the faintly luminescent echo of the bonding ritual, both of them obviously, undeniably connected in ways that transcended normal diplomatic relations. Thessaly walked forward with regal confidence, and Eli matched her pace, acutely aware of every eye tracking their movement. He could feel her determination through the bond, her decision to face this head-on rather than hide or dissemble. The silence stretched, pregnant with shock and curiosity and probably a fair amount of horror from those who had never seen their queen touch anyone with familiarity, let alone obvious affection. They reached the throne, and rather than taking her seat, Thessaly turned to face the assembly. She didn't release Eli's hand, a statement in itself that sent ripples of reaction through the crowd. My court, she said, her voice carrying that multitonal resonance that suggested she was amplifying herself to fill the entire chamber. Advisors, nobles, representatives of the blood courts, witness and acknowledge. Today the Nocturnus Empire enters a new era. The murmuring started immediately, speculation and concern rippling through the crowd. Thessaly let it build for a moment before continuing. For 3,000 years I have ruled alone. For 3,000 years, I have maintained the empire through strength and will and the authority of isolation. For 3,000 years, I have been your queen, your sovereign, your symbol of power and terror and order. She paused, and Eli felt her gathering courage through the bond. Today that changes. Not my rule, I remain your queen, your authority, your protector. But I no longer stand alone. She pulled Eli forward slightly, presenting him to the court. This is Commander Eli Vance, representative of the human species, diplomat of Earth, and as of this hour, my bonded companion. We have completed the ritual of true seeing, and he has accepted the binding. He is now part of my existence as I am part of his, and he will be recognized as such throughout the empire. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that comes from hundreds of beings being simultaneously shocked beyond the capacity for immediate response. Eli could see faces ranging from stunned disbelief to outright horror to, in a few cases, what might have been cautious hope. Finally, someone spoke, an older being, clearly of high rank based on the deference shown by those around him, with silver hair and markings that glowed a deep purple. Your Majesty, he said carefully, with all respect, such a bond has not been formed by a ruling sovereign in in millennia. The implications are vast. The vulnerabilities created are mine to accept, Thessaly interrupted, her voice carrying steel beneath the courtesy. I am well aware of the implications, Lord Corvinus. I am well aware that bonding creates shared vulnerability, that it marks me as having emotional attachments that can be exploited, that it represents a departure from 3,000 years of precedent. Her hand tightened on Eli's. I am also aware that I am sovereign, that my decisions are not subject to court approval, and that I have chosen this with full understanding of the consequences. Another voice, female this time, with hair like flame and markings that pulsed red gold. But your majesty, he is human. Their lifespans are approximately 120 years under optimal conditions. Yes, Thessaly cut her off. Were I not bonded to him? The bond extends his existence to match mine. He will live as long as I do, age as I age, exist as I exist. That particular concern is already addressed. The murmuring grew louder, and Eli could sense the court trying to process this information, trying to understand how their unchanging, eternal, isolated queen had suddenly made a decision that overturned millennia of precedent. A third figure stepped forward, and this one was different. Taller even than Thessaly, with wings that spanned wider and markings that covered more of his visible skin. Power radiated from him in a way that made Eli's instincts scream danger. Through the bond, he felt Thessaly's recognition. This was someone significant, someone whose opinion mattered. Empress, the figure said, and his voice carried weight that went beyond sound, authority, age, power. I am pleased. The court fell silent again, this time in clear surprise at his words. The figure smiled, an expression that was both terrifying and somehow warm. I am Lord Archon Darkwing, eldest of the Blood Courts and advisor to Her Majesty for these past 2,000 years. And I say again, I am pleased. He bowed to Thessaly, a gesture of respect rather than subservience, then turned his attention to Eli. Commander Vance. You have accomplished something that many of us had given up hope of ever witnessing. You have reminded our Empress that she is more than her duty. For this, you have my gratitude and my support. His gaze intensified. You also have my warning. You are now the single most valuable and vulnerable point in the Empire. There are those who would exploit this bond, who would seek to harm you to harm her. You will need protection, training, and allies. All of which I offer freely. Eli found his voice, though it took effort with that much power focused on him. Thank you, Lord Darkwing. I accept your offer, though I hope I can prove to be more than simply a vulnerability to be protected. Something that might have been respect flickered in Darkwing's eyes. Already you understand the concern. Good. You are not stupid, then merely reckless. He turned back to Thessaly. Your Majesty, I suggest we adjourn to private council. There are practical matters to address. Security protocols, formal announcements, treaty negotiations with the human government, integration of Commander Vance into the court structure. The full assembly does not need to witness those discussions. Thessaly nodded, relief flowing through the bond. She had been prepared to defend her choice against sustained opposition, and Darkwing's immediate support had shifted the dynamics significantly. Agreed. Private council in 1 hour. For now, this assembly is dismissed. Spread the word through the Empire. Your queen is no longer alone, and the age of isolation has ended. The court dispersed in a flurry of motion and conversation, hundreds of beings processing this information and undoubtedly racing to send messages, make calls, adjust strategies based on this new reality. Within minutes, the vast chamber was empty except for Thessaly, Eli, Darkwing, and a handful of other high-ranking figures who clearly were part of this private council. Thessaly finally released Eli's hand, but only so she could properly introduce him. Commander Vance, these are the members of my inner circle. Lord Darkwing you've met. Lady Crimson, she gestured to the flame-haired woman. My military commander and strategic advisor. Lord Corvinus, my diplomatic corps leader. Lady Starweaver, a being who looked like she was made of barely contained light. My chief scientist and technology advisor. And Lord Nightfall, a figure who seemed to exist slightly out of phase with normal reality. My intelligence master and spy master. Eli nodded to each in turn, trying to memorize names and faces while processing the fact that he was now apparently expected to work with the leadership of a galactic empire. "Honored to meet you all," he said, falling back on diplomatic training. "Though I'll admit, an hour ago, I expected to be negotiating mining rights, not being introduced to the Imperial Council." That got a few chuckles, breaking some of the tension. Lady Crimson stepped forward, studying him with eyes that seemed to see through skin to the truth beneath. "You genuinely care for her," she said, "and it wasn't a question. Not the Queen, not the Empress, not the symbol of power. The person." "Yes," Eli confirmed simply. There was no point in elaborating, either they would believe him or they wouldn't. Lady Crimson smiled, and it transformed her severe features into something approaching warmth. "Good. She deserves that. She has earned that 1,000 times over." She turned to Thessaly. "Your Majesty, I will begin immediate security enhancements. Commander Vance is now a priority asset, which means enhanced protection protocols and threat assessment of anyone who might seek to exploit the bond." "Thank you, Crimson," Thessaly said, and Eli felt her gratitude through their connection, not just for the practical security, but for the acceptance implicit in Crimson's response. Lord Corvinus approached next, his expression still concerned but no longer hostile. "Your Majesty, the diplomatic implications are significant. The human government will need to be contacted immediately. They will have concerns, demands, probably accusations. We should prepare our response carefully." Eli spoke up before Thessaly could respond. "If I may, Lord Corvinus, I should be the one to contact my government. They'll take it better coming from me, and I can frame this in terms that will minimize panic." He smiled wryly. "It'll still cause a political earthquake, but hopefully we can keep it to local rather than galactic scale." Corvinus studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That would be wise. We can provide you with secure communications facilities. I suggest crafting your message carefully. Emphasize the diplomatic advantages, the unprecedented access to imperial decision-making, the opportunity for humanity to have a voice at the highest levels of galactic politics. Basically, spin my personal decision as political strategy," Eli said dryly. "Precisely," Corvinus agreed without a hint of irony. "It's what I would do." The discussion continued, practical matters piling up. Where Eli would reside, with Thessaly in her private chambers apparently, what his formal title would be still being debated, how to handle security without making him feel like a prisoner, a delicate balance, how to integrate him into court functions, gradually with training, and dozens of other details that came with suddenly having a human diplomat permanently bonded to the Galactic Empress. Through it all, Eli kept feeling Thessaly's presence in his awareness, a constant warm reassurance that he wasn't navigating this alone. Whenever he felt overwhelmed, she would send a pulse of encouragement through the bond. Whenever he said something that landed well, he felt her pride. It was strange and wonderful and occasionally disorienting, this constant awareness of another person's emotional state, but he found he didn't mind. If anything, it made the overwhelming situation more bearable, knowing that she was right there with him, experiencing it together. The Outer Verge colonies had sent a delegation to the Crimson Crown, ostensibly to formalize the treaty that had spared them from imperial annexation. In reality, the delegation's leaders admitted privately to Eli, they had come out of curiosity, to see if the rumors were true, if the human diplomat had really bonded with the alien vampire queen, if the most feared being in known space was really walking around the megastructure holding hands with a man from Mars colony. Eli stood on the arrival platform, waiting to greet them, no longer wearing his diplomatic uniform but rather clothing that someone in the Imperial Fashion Department had designed. Something that blended human and nocturnus aesthetics, formal enough for his position but comfortable enough for daily wear. He had grown accustomed to the stares, the whispers, the constant awareness that his presence here was still shocking to most who encountered him. The delegation disembarked, and he saw their eyes widen as they took in the transformed megastructure. In 3 months, the Crimson Crown had changed dramatically, the oppressive darkness had lifted, the architecture had evolved to include warmer aesthetics, art had appeared in public spaces where before there had been only military efficiency. It was still clearly the heart of a vast empire, still maintained the gothic sci-fi aesthetic that defined Nocturnus culture, but it no longer felt like walking through a monument to isolation and fear. "Commander Vance," the delegation leader said, approaching with cautious respect. "Or should I call you consort now? We're not entirely sure of the proper protocol." Eli smiled. "Eli is fine. We're still working out the formal titles ourselves. The court wants to call me Prince Consort, Thessaly prefers bonded companion, and I've been pushing for that human who somehow convinced the Queen to take a vacation." That got surprised laughs from the delegation. The leader, a woman named Administrator Chin, studied him carefully. "You seem, well, happy even. The reports we received suggested this might be a hostage situation, but you don't carry yourself like a prisoner." "That's because I'm not one," Eli assured her. "I chose this, Administrator. Freely and with full understanding." "Well, as full as anyone can have before actually experiencing it," he amended honestly. "It's been an adjustment certainly. Learning to navigate imperial politics, understanding cultures that are millions of years older than humanity, getting used to the bond." He trailed off, smiling at some private thought. "But yes, I'm happy. Happier than I've been in a very long time." Before Chin could respond, Eli felt a familiar presence in his awareness. Thessaly was approaching. He turned, and there she was, descending from one of the upper platforms with her characteristic grace, her wings folded elegantly against her back, her silver hair catching the light. She wore formal robes for this diplomatic occasion, but there was a softness to her expression that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. The delegation immediately tensed, ancient instincts responding to her presence. But then they saw something that made them pause. Thessaly smiled as she saw Eli, a genuine expression of joy that transformed her face, and when she reached him she immediately took his hand, their fingers lacing together with comfortable familiarity. "Administrator Chin," Thessaly said, inclining her head in greeting. "Welcome to the Crimson Crown. I apologize for the delay in meeting with you. I was concluding negotiations with the Outer Rim Confederacy, and they are not known for their brevity." She glanced at Eli. "How are our guests settling in?" "Just arrived," Eli said, squeezing her hand. "I was about to offer them the official tour, unless you'd prefer to handle the diplomatic protocols yourself?" "You handle it," Thessaly said, and Eli felt her amusement through the bond. "You're better at making people feel comfortable anyway. I apparently still have a tendency to loom threateningly even when I'm trying to be welcoming." "You don't loom," Eli protested. "You have presence. There's a difference." "I loom," she insisted with a grin that showed her fangs. "But I'm working on it. 3,000 years of intentional intimidation is a difficult habit to break." The delegation was staring, clearly trying to process the casual banter between human diplomat and galactic empress. Administrator Chin found her voice first. "Your Majesty, if I may be candid, you're not quite what we expected." Thessaly's expression softened. "I imagine not. The propaganda broadcasts were very effective at creating a specific image. But as Eli has been gently pointing out to me for 3 months now, perhaps it's time for a more accurate representation." She gestured to the transformed megastructure around them. "The age of isolation and fear is ending, Administrator. Slowly, with many challenges and setbacks, but ending nonetheless. Your delegation is part of that, proof that diplomatic relationships built on mutual benefit rather than terror can succeed." She released Eli's hand, he felt her reluctance through the bond, and stepped forward to address the delegation more formally. "The Outer Verge colonies are under Imperial protection, not Imperial rule. You will maintain your autonomy, your governments, your way of life. In exchange, you agree to mutual defense pacts and trade relationships that benefit both our peoples. That is the treaty we offer, freely and without coercion." Administrator Chin looked stunned. "That's considerably more generous than we expected." "Yes, well," Thessaly said with a sidelong glance at Eli, "I've been receiving some advice about how relationships built on genuine partnership tend to be more stable than those built on fear. It's a novel concept for someone who ruled through intimidation for millennia, but the initial results are promising." Eli felt his heart swell with affection. 3 months ago that admission would have been impossible for her. acknowledging that she was changing, that she was learning, that someone else's perspective had value. Now she said it openly without shame or defensiveness. The tour and negotiations proceeded smoothly, and by the end of the day the delegation from the outer verge had signed the treaty and departed with expressions of cautious optimism. As the transport ships pulled away from the docking platform, Eli and Thessaly stood together, watching them disappear into the star field. "That went well," Eli observed. "It did," Thessaly agreed. "6 months ago I would have simply issued an ultimatum and enforced it. Today we negotiated as equals." She leaned against him, her wing draping over his shoulders like a protective cloak. "You're changing me, Eli Vance. Changing how I rule, how I think, how I exist in this empire." "You're changing yourself," he corrected gently. "I'm just providing moral support and occasional reality checks." She laughed, the sound still slightly surprised, as though she was still getting used to experiencing joy. "Perhaps. But you're the catalyst. You're the one who saw beneath the mask and insisted there was a person worth knowing underneath." She turned to face him fully, her crimson eyes searching his face. "Are you happy here? Truly? I know this wasn't what you expected when you accepted your diplomatic mission. I know you've given up your old life, your career path, your plans for the future." Eli pretended to consider the question seriously. "Let's see. I'm bonded to the most powerful and fascinating being in the galaxy. I have unlimited access to technologies and cultures that most humans won't encounter for centuries. I get to help reshape imperial policy towards something more humane. I live in a castle that responds to emotional states and displays real-time star charts on the ceilings. And most importantly," he pulled her close, "I get to be with someone who matters to me, who sees me as I am, who makes me want to be better while accepting me as I currently exist." He smiled at her. "So yes, Thessaly, I'm happy. Deliriously, improbably, ridiculously happy. Even when your court argues about proper forms of address. Even when I make cultural mistakes that require formal apologies. Even when I'm navigating imperial politics that are literally ancient history by human standards." He touched her face, tracing one of those bioluminescent markings. "I'm exactly where I want to be." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, and through the bond he felt her emotions, relief, joy, love, because yes, that's what it had become. Neither of them had said it yet, but both knew. And beneath it all, deep gratitude that she was no longer alone. 3,000 years, she murmured. 3,000 years of isolation, and then you walk into my throne room, see past every defense and mask, and decide I'm worth staying for. How did I get so lucky? Well, Eli said thoughtfully, from my perspective, I'm the lucky one. I was sent on a mission to negotiate with a terrifying alien queen, and instead I found someone who just needed to be seen. Not everyone gets to be part of a story like that. Thessaly opened her eyes, looking at him with an expression that held centuries of experience and the fresh wonder of someone discovering new possibilities. Our story, she corrected. Not mine or yours, ours. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Together, Eli agreed. They stood there on the platform, wrapped in each other's presence, bonded in ways that transcended biology or culture, while around them the Crimson Crown hummed with activity, 13 billion souls going about their lives, unaware that in this moment, on this platform, something profound had been acknowledged. The monster had learned she was more than her reputation. The Queen had remembered she was also a person. And the human diplomat from Mars Colony had found exactly what he hadn't known he was searching for. In the vast darkness between stars, in a throne room transformed by hope, in the impossible space where loneliness ended and connection began, two beings had chosen each other. And in that choice they had reshaped not just their own existence, but the very nature of the empire itself. The age of isolation was ending. The age of connection was beginning. And both of them, human and alien, diplomat and empress, two lonely souls who had found each other across the void, were ready to discover what that meant. Together. In the galactic year 3247, the Nocturnus Empire began a period of transformation that historians would later call the Awakening. At its center was an unlikely partnership. Empress Thessaly IX, who learned to rule with compassion as well as power, and Commander Eli Vance, who proved that sometimes the greatest diplomatic achievement isn't negotiating treaties, it's reminding someone that they matter. They would face challenges in the years to come: political opposition, external threats, the constant adjustment of learning to exist in shared consciousness. But they would face them together, bonded and alone, proving that connection was possible even across the vast gulfs that separated species, experience and understanding. And in her private moments, when the weight of empire grew heavy, Thessaly would remember a human standing in her throne room, looking at her terrible, beautiful face and saying without hesitation, "You are not scary. You are the most beautiful thing in the galaxy." Sometimes, that memory alone was enough to carry her through.